Now, this video is ultimately really going to be about whatever direction the current Labour Party is going to go in, and I am quite concerned in that direction. And it really is down to strategy that they decide to follow. And one of the key things you've got to really understand is the strategy they seem to be going, especially recently with that Keir Starmer speech, really seems to be going in a very bad direction. And to really understand, and I generally do with this, to really understand why that strategy is not going to work, full stop, you only really have to understand what really has happened to the Conservative Party ultimately. Like, you have to understand that following the exact same strategy that did not work for Rishi Sunak, did not work for any of the previous really conservative governments, going all the way back to David Cameron. It didn't work. And I would echo this, that you've had two spectacular election victories in Canada, in Australia, which have shown that centre-left parties can defeat right-wing populist ones, and quite in a smashing fashion as well. Those are the parties Labour should be looking to copy, and to have a look at what happened, the strategies they are doing, the policies that they are doing. Because ultimately, following this exact same policy, or this exact same strategy, shall we say, as the Conservatives, is certainly potentially could lead Labour into a very worrying direction, to say the least. So before we do get started, of course, into this, please do remember to click the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the One of Foundation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can well buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. So let's start. Let's start with all this. What ultimately was the background for the collapse of the Conservative Party? It was 14 years of incredibly low economic growth, public sector austerity, and in absolute administrative incompetence. Now, ultimately, at this point at the moment, we've had 0.7% growth announced this morning. Okay, 0.7, not much, but hey, could have been a lot worse when people were predicting it to be like 0.1% or even nothing at all. Public sector austerity. This is something Labour need to fix, and you ain't going to fix it by following or even going down a austerity path. It is just not going to work. You have to put money into public services for them to work. And here's the thing, if you look at polls, even Conservatives poll very highly when asked, hey, if the government were to raise taxes to pay for public services, would you be okay with that? And guess what? Unanimously across the board, people responded and have responded to, actually, yes, we like good public services. We like that they are there. We want them to exist. We want them to run. So yeah, paying for them going to be quite good. However, this is, of course, about the Conservative Party decline. You look at the current political climate. Badenoch remains completely, absolutely politically constrained. Completely. The local elections, the national elections were a heavy punishment delivered by voters, not just by your average, let's say, non-conservative voter, but even by the conservative voters themselves, who you've seen former strongholds basically either switch to UKIP or the Lib Dems. And that is directly because of the rhetoric that Kemi Badenoch and, well, shall we say, her previous successors engaged in. So what began all this? Well, this all began with the failed strategy of Boris Johnson, who wanted to unite the very socially conservative, non-metropolitan voters all against Labour's liberal urban base. This whole red wall strategy. However, that, if you remember, collapsed after all those failed levelling up promises. Remember, I always said there was going to be a balance between the two. You can have levelling up, but you can't have global Britain. And they went with that global Britain. And that ultimately meant they threw an entire portion, that entire voter base that Johnson had built up, just chucked away completely. Then you go into the Truss era and what happened there. And especially in the post-Truss era, the Sunak era, he doubled down on all the immigration rhetoric, pledging to stop the boats. But what was the result of all this? All the socially conservative voters ended up defecting to UKIP. Well, UKIP, I say Reform, but same party, just a different name, just a different colour. And why did that happen? Because ultimately, those conservative leaders had said, Farage is right, but you can't trust him to deliver. You can't trust him on this and this and this. You cannot keep on saying that Farage is right and then turn around and say, well, he won't deliver. You cannot double down like Kemi Badenoch is doing, where she's failing, even when they are out of power. This is the only conservative leader ever to be in opposition where they are losing support, because she doubles down constantly on all that Farage-style messaging, but doesn't offer any reason, any compelling reason for voters not to vote for Farage himself. This is resembling a complete and utter sunk cost fallacy, continuing now with the same failed plan of saying, well, Farage is right on this, but not giving a reason why not to vote for him. Because you are starting off the conversation with, well, Farage was right. And this is what Keir Starmer pretty much said almost immediately in that speech, that, oh, Farage was right. It is the same rhetoric, the same language, which ended up dooming, in many ways, the Conservative Party could very, very well doom the Labour Party in upcoming elections. So it is an absolute warning to the party, because you cannot mimic Farage on immigration and asylum. Otherwise, it could lead to, well, people abandoning the party. You saw the Runcorn by-election, which was all very, very much Labour going, scare tactics, don't vote for reform, or else that might not be, a very good idea. Going down on adopting a very hardline stance on immigration is alienating a lot of their voter base. We've seen that. So there are some very, very clear choices ahead. The first one is they have to avoid completely validating any of Reform's narrative, because ultimately that's what happened. You've got to fight against that narrative. A strategy of saying that Farage is right but being unreliable is not going to work, because immediately you're starting off with that sentence, well, Farage was right, because that failed for Sunak, it's failing for Badenoch, it's not going to work for Labour either. Not only that, but more left-wing and liberal voters probably going to end up abandoning Labour for that. Ultimately, that could be how, in many cases, Reform ends up winning, because the vote gets split in some of those areas, because a lot of those left and liberal voters abandon the party. So you have to be incredibly careful. We cannot spend the next couple of years just as the Conservative Party spent 14 years and their entire tenure boosting support from one of their main political rivals, being UKIP, of course, around the referendum and the whole Brexit debacle that ended up happening. Brexit Party itself pushing for an even harder stance on Brexit, and eventually, of course, Reform pushing hard on immigration, because all they ended up doing was boosting their rival. Labour has to learn from this if they want to avoid that exact same fate. And they have to follow examples like in Canada or Australia that very, very, very clearly, pardon me, they have to follow those examples where those clear examples have shown in Canada or Australia where they have shown centre-left parties can push back hard against right-wing populism. If they do not do that, then they're going to find themselves in a lot of trouble very, very soon. And all the success that they will over the next couple of years depends now on choosing a very distinct and clear election strategy. That's what we have to see. And you cannot copy a failed Conservative one. You cannot boost support by saying, well, Farage is right, but he's unreliable. That's not going to work. That is not going to work, because it was a failed political strategy for the Conservatives. It is going to be a failed political strategy for Labour, should they decide to follow that same one. So we'll see what happens, but I do hope that they take that lesson to heart, that they've got to really start listening to their core voter base about what they are saying, what they want, start to think of really good policy that can beat Farage, because there's a heck of a lot out there that they could go for and do to really beat Farage. But at the moment, I think, unfortunately, they've taken a very knee-jerk reaction, which was exactly what the Conservatives did for 14 years. They would knee-jerk, 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 knee-jerk. And as a result, that's where they are now. So we'll see what happens in this, but it is worrying. It is quite concerning in this. Ultimately, as I said, I don't like it. I don't like this direction. If you don't like this direction, then do what I do. I am a member of the Labour Party still. Join the internal groups in Labour to sort of push against that. Write to your Labour MP. Tell them, hey, this direction of, saying Farage is right, but not offering any other different clear alternatives why you should vote for Labour is going to be a bad, failed economic strategy. It failed for the Conservatives. Why on earth do you think it's going to work for you? Write to them. It works more than you think. Go see them as well in their surgeries. Go to your local meetings as well. This is what you have to do. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.